Hello, it has been ages since I filmed a sit down video. I've just been on a trip to New Zealand and Korea. I will leave a video linked to the cards. So I thought coming back, I would do a tag video. And this is the Where My Law Started tag, which was created by Carrie Can Read. And I will leave all of her information and the original tag video linked in the description in case you want to do it yourself. So this is the Where My Law Started tag, which is based on an Instagram trend where people were showing the books that they read as children, the books that made them the readers they were today. So I've got a lot of questions and I'm going to answer. The first one is, what's the first book you remember reading by yourself? I don't really remember. Looking at the questions for this tag, I realised I have a very vague memory of my childhood, which doesn't make a lot of sense because I have a pretty good memory in general, but it seems that I don't know a lot about my childhood. But my mother says that I was reading before I went to school. At like 3 or 4, I was reading by myself. So obviously I don't remember that. There's a good chance she was embellishing and that was not true. But I do remember reading quite a lot in school. I was always a big reader. Reading was a thing for me. Some of the books that I remember loving when I was a child were Rose Meets Mr. Wintergarten, which is about a little curly red-headed child, which I think that and Annie and Anne of Green Gables may have contributed to why I always wished I was a redhead as a child. But she loses her ball in this like horrible garden, and there's this old man who lives in this big house, and all the kids are scared of him, but she goes to get her ball back and introduces colour and flowers to Mr. Winterguard's garden because he just was too sad and he never opened the curtains. But she opens the curtains for him and he invites the children in to play in his garden. That was definitely one of my favourites as a child. There was also Harry McClary from Donaldson's Dairy, speaking of New Zealand. That is a Kiwi book. The dairy in that is not where they milk cows, it's the corner shop. That is what a dairy is in New Zealand. There was also the ones I remember from school, the Chip, Biff and Kipper books, which probably if you learnt to read in the UK in the 90s, then these were the books you were reading. And another one that I really remember loving and getting out from the library so often that my parents bought it for me was Illustrated Greek Myths, which was kind of comic strips based on myths from Greek mythology. And I mean, I did end up doing a classics degree, and writing poetry inspired by Greek mythology. So obviously that one had a great deal of impact on me. My dad also had like a cloth bound like old book that was Greek myths that I definitely read. Would have been a bit older at that point. And it had myths in it that I have never seen anywhere else. And I don't know where that book is. And I tried to find them when I was reading classics at university. And I just never found that myth again. So I don't know what that was about. Which character did you most identify with in, well, it says elementary school, but for us that is primary school. So the characters that I most identified with are exactly the characters you'd expect from someone who talks about books on the internet. Matilda, Hermione, Elizabeth Bennet. Yes, I read Pride and Prejudice when I was 11. But I think I understood what was going on because my brother and I watched the BBC miniseries version on VHS over and over again. So I was already very familiar with the story by the time I was reading it.
For One World Book Day when we were 10, me and my friend Joanna dressed as Lizzie and Jane.
But yeah, all of those bookish, opinionated, loud girls, those were the people I identified with, the people who always wanted to be right, and were kind of a bit fighty, basically, but in a words way. I only ever once got into a physical fight as in primary school. And then there was also like Anne of Green Gables, as I mentioned earlier. She was a bit more dreamy and whimsical than I was as a child, but I definitely had a fondness for that story as well. And maybe when I was even younger, Sophie, from the Sophie stories by Dick King-Smith, if any of you read them. She was kind of like an awkward, this was much younger, so this was like 5 or 6, and she was obsessed with like horse riding and farming and stuff, which was not something I was interested in at all. But she was little, she was kind of like awkward and weird and kind of determined and didn't do what people expected of her. And I think that's why I liked her quite a lot as well. What was your elementary school comfort book? I clearly had a thing for portal fantasy when I was between the ages of like 8 and 12, because a lot of the ones that I thought of are that kind of going to another world books. So there's Inkheart by Cornelia Funke, which is about people who are able to read people out of books. Meggie and her father, her father can read people out of books, and so he doesn't read aloud. But then all these people start turning up who are from this kind of other world, and there are some not very nice ones. And this is a whole series, and they end up like reading themselves into books as well as out of them. And so there is a lot of like traveling between these sort of different worlds, some of which are fictional. Then there was also the Stravaganza series. I cannot remember who that was by. Mary Hoffman? Am I making that up? I'll put it here, who that was by. And this was about a series of people around this school in North London, I think they were, and they'd find these objects somehow, or these objects would find them, and they would fall asleep holding them, and they would wake up in Renaissance era Venice, except that it wasn't actually Venice, it was another world, and it was, well, no, it wasn't all Venice, it was all Italy, and it was called Thalia in the books, but the first book was Venice, but it wasn't called Venice. It was called, I can't remember, but it was like the opposite. Instead of having a duke, they had a duchess. And this guy who's like a 15-year-old boy, he turns up there and he has cancer in our world, but he's healthy in that world. And he meets this girl who is like in the town when she shouldn't be. And there's this whole thing about he gets involved in the hijinks of Renaissance era fake Venice. And I really, really loved them a lot. And then there was also like his Dark Materials, again, another portal thing that they cut through to go into different worlds. Although in the beginning we are in this sort of alternative Oxford with Lyra. In the later books, there are portal and travel through worlds elements of that as well. And then one I really loved that I used to listen to on audiobook all the time was by Michael Morpurgo, who is a very famous British children's writer. I don't know how well known he is outside of the UK, but he wrote a version of Robin Hood in which a boy goes to, I think it's a boy, goes to the woods during a storm and ends up in Robin Hood times. I think he is Robin Hood when he goes back to medieval Britain. And then there's loads of others, like I read loads. So Roald Dahl, particularly the Fantastic Mr. Fox, the Jacqueline Wilson books, I don't think you could say were your safe space. They dealt with a lot of very dark topics for children, but I definitely read all of them. The Borrowers, which again I listened to a lot on audiobook. I listened to tapes from the library and then CDs from the library a lot when I was really little, which I guess is why I still listen to so many audiobooks now. It's just the way I grew up with it. Like when we drove, so I from London, but my family are from Ireland, so we would drive from London to either Fishguard in the south of Wales or Holyhead in the north of Wales to get the ferry across to Ireland. And so that would take like all day. And so we would listen to audiobooks in the car whilst we were driving. So yeah, being in the back of my dad's car, listening to Stephen Fry or any of these other stories. The Harry Potters were good because they were so long, but obviously that world is completely tainted now and also not as good. Like, if you've ever tried to read it as an adult, it doesn't necessarily hold up either. And then another weird ones that I used to read were by this guy, I can't remember what it was, so let me have a look. This guy called Philip Ridley, and he did a lot of illustrations, and they were written in a kind of weird experimental way, experimental for children's fiction. There was a lot of like rhythm and poetry and like onomatopoeia and like very physical, and they were weird, strange stories. There was one called Casper in the Glitter that I remember the name of, but the one that I really remember the actual book, Vinegar Street, was Vinegar Street. I really, really loved that. And that's not a book that, those books, Philip Ridley, are not books I've ever heard anyone else talk about. But I loved them as a child. They were kind of that dark, melancholy whimsy that I talk about loving now as an adult, and a bit experimental, weird, but fun and silly and humorous as well. I really, really liked them. And yeah, I don't think I know anyone else who's ever read them. So if you have, let me know. The next question is, where or what was your safe space as a kid? This is one of the ones where I'm like, I don't really remember. I liked school, despite the fact that I was bullied in primary school intermittently. I did kind of like school. My childminder's house, I really liked going to my childminders. I was always surrounded by lots of kids because my parents worked in the city, so they would leave the house at like 7:30 and get home at like 6:30. So I was always out at childminders or after school clubs or stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time around a lot of kids. And so yeah, I think that was kind of my safe space. The back of my dad's car as well, when my brother wasn't punching me, would be somewhere that I had a good time driving around. Yeah, my dad used to take us on what he called surprise drives, where he obviously didn't know what to do with us and would just drive until he saw a sign for something he could do. So yeah, the driving around with my dad was something that I really enjoyed as a child. Which, you know, I still can't drive and I'm still a passenger princess, so maybe I am keeping that memory alive. How has your taste in books changed since childhood? Well, I don't really read portal fantasies anymore, except the Nevermore series, which is a children's series about a girl who goes into another world. But I don't really read fantasy in general anymore. I think because for me, like writing, what I'm interested in books now is not plot, and it's not the sort of things that fantasy is interested in writing about. So it doesn't really work for me that same way anymore. I can read fantastical stuff. I feel like on the more horror end of things can sometimes scratch that same sort of, it's fantastical, but it's still doing something more with the writing, or like less literal. Like, I know fantasy is obviously fantastical, but a lot of the time it's very much like there's a quest or there's something going on that's very plot driven, and what is going on is what is going on, which is not something that I'm necessarily drawn to in books anymore. So I think the horror side of things can do stuff that's a bit more figurative and a bit more interesting for me personally. Do you feel inspired to read by your school? And if yes, how did your upbringing encourage reading? My school definitely encouraged reading. There were always books everywhere. There were always class books. I hated reading with classes though, because it would always slow things down and people reading out loud. It was kind of boring. So I never really got into that. And I don't remember us reading anything that I particularly loved, particularly in primary school. My own personal upbringing, both my parents used to be big readers. Neither of them really read anymore. But there were always books in my house. Going to the library was a big thing. We had the only like non-state owned public library left in the UK, in the part of London which I grew up in, Crystal Palace. I think it is now state owned, but it was like a charitable institution rather than a state institution when I went there. And it was in this kind of old Art Deco building, and you'd go upstairs to the children's library. And I definitely remember spending a lot of time there as a child, because obviously it's free for one thing. But you could borrow tapes, you could borrow books on tape and books on CD from the library, as well as physical books. And so me and my brother had like a tape player, and we would fall asleep listening to audiobooks, which is something I still do to this day. Obviously trained me that I need a story to fall asleep to. Stories were a big thing, and I did like, there were always opportunities to be a reader or to do things related to reading. Like, I was in storytelling club at school, primary school this was. We did storytelling, and then I did storytelling at like the local, I don't know, I got a medal. There was like a local arts thing for children, and I got a medal doing storytelling there. So stories were definitely a big thing. My dad loves to tell stories, even if and my dad used to read aloud to us a lot. My dad have memories of being on holiday and sitting on the balcony of this place in Greece, and my dad reading to me and my brother, and this like older couple coming over and being like, oh, this was so lovely. We really enjoyed sitting and listening to you read this story. So I guess that was something that definitely encouraged my reading, or my relation to stories, as a child. In school specifically, I was definitely, you were encouraged, if you were a reader, to go to older classes and get books from them, to help stretch you. There was definitely reading time, and teachers were aware of kind of your level and the kind of books that you wanted to read and would be interested in. And when I got older and I was in secondary school, there would be how much I want to share about myself on the internet. I don't know, but there were teachers who gave me books, is something that I will say. There were teachers who gave me books whilst I was in class, sometimes to read. What book have you wanted to return to lately? I don't know. I don't really reread books. It's not something that I do. I mean, I reread Wolf Hall recently. I'll leave that linked in the cards above. But in general, I don't reread a lot. So wanting to return to books from my childhood is not something that I really think about. I did do it once. I have a video where I reread a childhood favourite series, which was a historical fiction set around the First World War, which I was not as good as I remember. One of the romantic leads was a black and tan. Not sure why my mother approved that book, but she probably didn't realise. But yeah, in general, yeah, I didn't enjoy the rereading experience of that. Inkheart, maybe that's one of the ones that I never finished that series because I think I aged out of it before it all came out, and so that's one that I'm like quite a completionist, so I feel odd about not having finished that one. Favorite or formative YA series? Now, I was a complete snob as a teenager from the age as a child. From the age of 10, I was a complete snob. I was reading Jane Austen and Shakespeare like a wanker. I wasn't reading a lot of YA series. Everyone in my school started reading Twilight just before the first Twilight film came out. And so I tried to read it and I got to the baseball scene, was too pissed off, thought it was too bad, couldn't keep going. So I was quite a snob. I mean, I mentioned His Dark Materials before, but I definitely read that when I was younger. I was 10, 11, 12. So it wasn't quite the YA series. It's a slightly younger series, I think. There's a lot of complex themes in it that you can get out of it reading it even as an adult. But for me, the actual reading experience of that was when I was a bit younger. I did read the Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging books. That was ones that I was more into. I thought that they were really funny and everyone was reading them and I really enjoyed that. In fact, I read that one out loud in the car to my dad and my brother and they both really enjoyed it as well. So clearly, yeah, that was more my sort of YA, although I remember going to watch the film in the cinema when it came out and cringing so hard. I could not stand it. I really, really hated the film. But I did like the books. And then another one, which was historical fantasy set in Japan, was Grass for His Pillow by Leanne Hearn, which was about there's this guy who's he's a Christian and he's a part of a persecuted group by this kind of one lord, and he gets taken to be kind of apprenticed to this other lord, and then it turns out that he's got these powers of this group called the Tribe, which they're kind of ninjas, but they have supernatural powers. And then there's also a girl who's part of a kind of lower nobility family, who's a hostage at another family's house, and she's a teenage girl as well, and she's so beautiful, and men die when they try to interact with her. And I remember really, really loving that. I don't know if that would stand up or hold up today, but I did enjoy it when I was younger. Oh, and A Series of Unfortunate Events. Again, I started them when I was younger, but as a completionist, I kept reading them all the way through when I was to the point when I was kind of too old for them, I think. The kind of writing, I really loved them. And I loved, again, like I've said, that kind of dark but witty and irreverent style of writing, and the melancholy whimsy. Those are all things that I enjoy now. But I think that the writing style wears a bit thin. After 13 books there's a lot of repetition in those books. So maybe my remembrance of them is not as fond as it would have been. But I do remember the 10th book, my bookseller at my local independent bookshop ordered in for me from the US, because it got released in the US earlier than it did here. And he specially ordered it in for me because he knew I wanted to read them. But then it didn't match my other books. So I was disappointed about it, which is funny because now I'm like a spine-breaking, dog-earing, scribbling in the books, doesn't read series person. So that sort of thing doesn't bother me anymore. But I remember being kind of upset. And also it had deckled edges, which was the first time I think I had encountered them. A book you had to read in school, but you loved. Pride and Prejudice. Again, I had to read in year 11 when I was 16. We had to reread Pride and Prejudice. No, I was 15. It was year 10. I remember because all of us, I did an exchange trip to Russia because I studied Russian in secondary school, and all of the girls who were going, I went to an all-girls school, all of the girls who were going to Russia were in the same English class, so we all took our books with us and we were reading them on the plane to Russia. And yeah, I did enjoy Pride and Prejudice. I also loved Shakespeare, as I mentioned earlier. So we studied King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, The Tempest. I'm sure there were others. I'm sure we did, because like I did English right up until the end of school, and I think we studied a different Shakespeare play every year. So I believe I would have studied 7 of them, but I can't remember any of the others. Those were my favourites. I love Macbeth. Basically do the whole of Macbeth. Hamlet. I did study Hamlet in drama as well. I think it makes sense. Like, I like historical fiction and ghost stories and darker stuff, so it makes sense. Macbeth's kind of my favourite. And then one I had to study. So for my A levels, we did the Gothic as one of our modules, and so we had to read old Gothic stuff. So we read, in Shakespeare in Love, the kid that's like, he was kissing her bubbies, and he's a playwright, John Webster. The Duchess of Malfi, we studied that, and Macbeth, and then also like some more modern stuff. So we did The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, which is the one I wanted to talk about. I loved The Bloody Chamber. It was like my favourite book at the time. I was obsessed with it. I read it loads of times, and I thought it was the best book ever written. Dark Gothic fairy tale retellings with a kind of witty, visceral grossness, all sorts of stuff that I still love in books. And Angela Carter may have been the instigation for my love of kind of a gory horror with a whimsical, humorous side to it. Your weirdest favourite book? I clearly have stopped answering them. My weirdest favourite book? Well, I've mentioned some of them, like that Casper and the Glitter Vinegar Street stuff that I don't think anyone else knew about. I'm assuming this is as a child, my weirdest favourite book. Obviously, like loving Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare as an 11-year-old is a bit weird. As I said, I have such bad memory of my child, like not bad memories, but like I am lacking in memories of my childhood to know what my favourite books were. I'm sure there are loads that would like come up. But yeah, I can't really think of anything that's that weird, except for The Child of Irish Republicans really loving a book where one of the characters is a black and tan, I guess. Bit weird. I don't think I understood the historical context at the time. If your 13-year-old self could live in a fictional world, which would it be? Is it different from the world you choose now? I mean, I assume it would be Hogwarts as a 13-year-old. As I said, I don't know. I guess that's the one that's the most, as a not huge fantasy reader, as someone who didn't read like all the other ones that I've talked about, feel a bit more dark than that. Actually, maybe Extravaganza. Maybe I wanted to live in Renaissance Italy, because that Renaissance Italy didn't have like smallpox and stuff. So yeah, actually probably it would have been the world of Extravaganza and Renaissance Italy and riding horses, and there's magic in that world as well. So I think probably I would say Renaissance Italy of Extravaganza series, Talia, it was called. And is it different from the one I'd want to live in now? I don't know. Now I'd want to live in like the 100-acre wood or something, just something cozy and simple where everything's easy and nice. And the biggest lesson you have to learn is how to be nice to each other. I feel like I'm much more looking for just like calm and chillness now than adventure. I like a bit of adventure, but I think that I'm not so much looking for like epic and romantic in the traditional sense of the word than I was at 13. I'm much more looking for sweet and cozy and calm, and where I don't have to like do a job. That would be nice. So, yeah, probably now I would say the 100-acre wood. That's the first one that came to my head. Is there a newly released book you wished you had when you were younger? This question is probably, there's a lot of people for whom there was like no representation for them when they were younger, and there was, as I have said, a lot of representation for loud, bossy young girls who think they're the smartest person in the room. So I was full of representation, as I was very well represented as a child. So probably that's not so important to me. There are books that I wish that I love that I've read as an adult that I think my child self would love, like Howl's Moving Castle. I didn't read until a few years ago. Obsessed. Absolutely loved it. And then also the Nevermore series, I think, is a series that not just me, I think a lot of kids could have appreciated that as a child. It is, a whimsical, wonderful fantasy that is interesting. There's so many layers to it. I definitely think it's going to get darker as the series progresses. In fact, the new one's just come out, so I probably will be reading that soon. And I think that my child self would have loved it. But I don't think I needed it in the same way that other people may have. Those are all of the questions. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of those books as a child. There are probably loads I'm missing, but as I said, my memory of my childhood seems to be quite vague. But thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye bye.